couple of weeks ago, I did a video entitled 13 Great Guitars That You Might Not Know About. I had a lot of fun making that video, and it really took off, a lot more than I certainly expected it to. It got a lot of views, brought in a lot of new subscribers to the channel here, but most importantly, I got a lot of really positive feedback on that. Specifically, a number of people requesting a part 2. So without further ado, we are indeed going to do a part 2. Here are 13 more great guitars that you might not know about. Let's get to it. Number 1, Duesenberg Guitars. Despite the fact that this company has been around since 1995, it still surprises me that a lot of people are not familiar with Duesenberg guitars, and I think a lot of that may have to do with the obvious confusion with the audio manufacturer from the early 20th century. That said, the Duesenberg Guitar Company make fantastic, great quality guitars, most of which are designed in the, with a kind of a modern take on the old Art Deco guitar designs of the 1950s and 1960s. At one point, they even had a V model called the Rocket that was designed specifically for Michael Schenker with his, black and white Dean V, Flying V guitar in mind, that eventually went on to become a production model. Probably the coolest thing that they have done recently is come out with the Johnny Depp signature guitar. Yes, folks, that is correct. Actor Johnny Depp has a signature Duesenberg guitar model that he uses to play in the band with Alice Cooper and Joe Perry in the Hollywood Vampires. Whether you like the band or not, whether you like Johnny Depp as a guitar player or not, the concept of the band is really cool, in my opinion. Hollywood, famous Hollywood actors, famous rock stars all getting together to form a supergroup and going out on tour together. Very cool concept, and a Duesenberg guitar absolutely fits that image, in my opinion. Number 2, Tom Anderson Guitars. This is another guitar company that have been around for a long time and make extremely great quality and high-end guitars, particularly Strats and Super Strat type models. If you're a Strat or a Super Strat player and you're kind of wondering what you've been missing all this time, go play a Tom Anderson guitar. I particularly like the Drop Top S, and the Cobra models. Go play one of those guitars. If you're wondering what you're missing, I bet you don't look back. Number 3. Epiphone Prophecy Guitars. I admit I have been very critical of Gibson and Epiphone since the start of my channel, actually before that, but I have been rather critical at times, and I have been rather supportive of both Gibson and Epiphone at times. However, this is one of those times when I think that they absolutely got it right. Back in the 2000s, I believe, the mid-2000s, give or take, Epiphone came out with the Prophecy series guitars. These were, they came in several different models. There was a Les Paul, an SG, an EM2, which was kind of a weird Super Strat looking kind of thing, and I believe the Futura, which was a kind of an oddball take on an Explorer that looked kind of cool. You could get any of these guitars. The Les Paul in particular was my favorite. That one you could get either with active EMGs or you could get it with passive Gibson Dirty Fingers pickups, which was the one that I preferred. That model actually, I believe, is still in production today. These were very high quality Gibson model guitars that you could buy for the $700 or $800 range. I believe the Les Paul model today still sells for $799. They had a lot of great features on them, really cool, unique finishes that you don't see in any other Epiphone or Gibson models, really, certainly at that time. And satin back finished necks, and they played and sounded great. They played and sounded as good as any American-made Gibson I have ever gotten my hands on. If you're looking for a good quality Gibson guitar, but you don't want to spend a whole lot of money, check out the Prophecy series. There, you can find them on the used market for very affordable prices. Number 4, Agile and vintage guitars. No, I'm not talking about actual vintage old guitars. There is actually a brand out there called Vintage Guitars, and I am looping them in with the Agile guitar brand. In the first video, I sang the praises of Bernie guitars along with other brands of that era that were making fantastic, essentially Gibson models, brands like Tokai and Greco and Ibanez, among others. All those guitars are fantastic. Well, you might ask who might be doing that today, and the answer to that are Agile Guitars and Vintage Guitars. Those two companies are both making fantastic quality instruments for, again, very affordable prices. If you search the used market, you can find both for right around the $300 range or less, particularly the Les Paul models. They're made with set neck construction, good quality wood selection, really clear sounding pickups, moderate sounding pickups with a lot of clarity in them. They're not muddy at all, and they play great. They play great. If you're soured on Gibson, or you're one of those people that doesn't want to be seen with a guitar that says Epiphone on the headstock, maybe you ought to check out the Agile and Vintage brand guitars, because they may have exactly what you're looking for. Number 5. There are a few guitars on this list that cater specifically to the pointy guitar community, and if you are new to this channel, that is a community that I happen to be a card-carrying member of, which is why I absolutely had to include the Minarik Inferno. Now, you might be surprised to see a guitar like this from a guy who makes fun of the reverse Flying V as often as he does, but I gotta admit, the first time I saw one of these things, I thought it was really, really cool. The only reason I didn't buy it is because it is literally almost half, it's probably half the size of me. This is a big, big guitar, but it is weight relieved. It's really not all that heavy. It's just big. Regardless, if you're playing in a metal band and you're on stage with a lot of lights and and the paint and putting on the show, this is a really, really cool guitar that would look great in that particular environment, in that particular situation. Furthermore, the Minarik guitars are actually really, really intricately made. And, they are built with a lot of detail and with a lot of thought put into them. Even if you don't like the shape, check out some of the other Minarik guitars out there that might be a little bit more subtle in body style. And I think you might be surprised what you find, especially if you've never heard of this brand. Everybody, I think, ought to check out Minarik guitars at some point. Number 6, the Kramer Focus. Of one, obviously, I happen to own. I included this guitar because this one, back when it was made, this particular model is an 84. These guitars were really, really prevalent back in the early mid 80s, especially. These guitars were viewed by a lot of people as kind of the poor man's Eddie Van Halen model, because of course he did have a stint during his career in that era when he was playing Kramer guitars, and of course was known for at that time for being simply a single pickup player. So hence where the poor man's Eddie Van Halen moniker came from. However, the other thing about this guitar is this was originally designed and built as a student model. What looks to be a pretty stripped down guitar, when you look a little bit closer, especially by today's standards, some of the specs that are on this guitar are absolutely amazing. I did change out the pickup on this guitar to a Duncan distortion, but I do have the original, and I'm probably going to put it back in just for the sake of originality, because it does sound good. And despite the single volume knob, this thing actually has, and again, remember, this was designed as a student model, this thing actually has an original American-made Floyd Rose tremolo, high-quality bolt-on neck, and that, believe it or not, is, in fact, a Brazilian rosewood fretboard. And, of course, you have a locking tremolo and the famous Kramer hockey stick, banana headstock, whatever you want to call it. The Focus series came in several models. There's a 1000, which is what this one is. I believe a 3000, and a couple of others. The 1000 is the only one I believe that had the single humbucker. The rest of them all had multiple pickups. Prices for these guitars on the used/vintage markets are finally beginning to climb, and I think a lot of that has to do with Gibson's announcement that they are going to finally relaunched the Kramer brand and take it seriously, and even had some new Kramer guitar models to show off at Winter NAMM this year. For the longest time, you could find these on the used market all day long for $300 or less. Prior to shooting this video, I wanted to look them up, and there are several that are creeping up around the $500 to $600 range now. I have only seen one in my lifetime that has sold for up around the $600 range. Prior to looking them up again here before this video. So, if you want a good quality guitar, you need to jump on them because the values of these things are climbing, and they're climbing fast. Number 7, the Charvel Model Series. Another guitar on this list that I happen to own. The Model Series Charvels, that is really that's what they're called. There was a Charvel Model 1, Model 2, and they went all the way up to Model 7. A couple of them even had, I think it was like a 2 and a 2A, or a 3 and a 3A and a 3B or something like that. So there was certainly variations of each of those along the way. The Model 5 and the Model 6 were my favorites because those were the neck-through models, and that's what I prefer. Also, in addition to the neck-through models, this particular guitar also happened to have an active preamp in it that is activated when you turn up the tone knob to give it a little bit more oomph, particularly if you were playing through a Marshall JCM 800 or similar amplifier of the era. These were made back in the late 80s and into the early 90s and are pretty highly sought after. In other words, what these were basically American-made Jackson Dinkies and soloists, this one being a soloist model made in Japan. The designs of the American-made Jackson models versus the Charvel made in Japan models of the same era are very, very, very similar. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, if you didn't have the money for a USA Jackson soloist, you might have the money for a Charvel Model 5 that came with virtually the exact same specs as the USA model and the same build quality. Fast playing necks, great sounding electronics. Do not let the Jackson pickups of that era fool you compared to the inexpensive import Jackson pickups you see today. Back then, these Jackson pickups were extremely high quality American-made electronics. Alongside that, they also came with an active preamp on the inside of it that is activated when you turn up the tone knob for a little bit extra boost, for when you were playing through a JCM 800 or similar amplifier. Again, excellent quality guitars, much like the Kramer Focus. The values of these on the used market are climbing pretty quickly, so if this is something that you would be interested in, you need to buy it fast. Number 8. Speaking of Jackson guitars, the Jackson Dinky is one of the most popular guitar models that Jackson has in their lineup, as it has been around for decades now, and there has been all different kinds of iterations and models and versions, etc., etc., etc. One of the more popular and better quality models, particularly for the money that I can think of, was a model called the DK2M. Those guitars are everywhere on the used market and not very hard to find at all. Many people, particularly Jackson fanatics, have either seen or played or owned one at some point. However, there is another model very similar to that called the DK2S. The DK2S was very, very similar to the DK2M. The difference being the DK2S actually had a Sustainiac pickup in the neck position. The other major difference was it also came with a few other finish options that the DK2M did not. Back in my days working in a guitar shop, I saw countless DK2Ms come and go through the store, both new and used. I saw exactly one DK2S, and I'm still kicking myself today for not buying that guitar. Think about it. It's a Jackson Dinky with a Sustainiac in it. How cool would that be? I checked reverb for these guitars prior to shooting this video, and while there's certainly several of them out there, they seem to have gone up in value by at least a couple $100 since the last time that I looked, which was just a few years ago. You can still find these guitars for $700, $800, $900 pretty consistently, but again, that is a pretty big jump, especially since the one that I saw I had the opportunity to buy for $500, and I didn't. Stupid move on my part. Number 9, Warrior guitars. A lot of people have not heard of Warrior guitars because they are a small, teeny, tiny little boutique guitar maker. However, they have been around for a long, long time. They build some of the most intricately designed guitars that I have ever gotten my hands on, and I have actually gotten the opportunity to play a couple. But only a couple. You don't see these things very often because these things take so long to build. There just aren't very many of them made. These guitars are for guitar players that have a lot of money to spend, and by a lot of money, I'm talking no less than $4,000. Somewhere in the 5 to 6 range is probably a little bit more average. And if you really want to get out the checkbook and the big bank account, you can easily spend up to $8,000 or more on a Warrior guitar. And this is just as of the last time that I checked them out, which was quite a while ago. I'm sure you could spend more than that. But the quality guitars that you are getting are as high as you can possibly imagine. I can't think of anything that any other guitar maker has ever put out, including Gibson, Fender, and PRS, that are on par with the Warrior guitars. The downfall to one of these is if you buy one new, you're married to it. Unfortunately, because so many people have not heard of them, they do not resell well, and they are very, very difficult to maintain their value on the used market. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of them selling used on Guitar Center's website right now for under $2,000. If you're in the market for a high-quality guitar at a good deal, that's probably a good place to start. Number 10, Valley Arts guitars. When I did the first video, a number of viewers commented and mentioned Valley Arts guitars, and I absolutely agree. Most of these guitars seem to come out of California. I admit I don't know a whole lot on the backstory of the company itself. However, the specimens that I have played, most of them seem to be Strat models and play and sound as well as any Strat that I've ever gotten my hands on. They also seem to be pretty affordable on the used market, so if you're in the market for a Strat or a Strat style guitar, but might be looking for something just a little bit different, check out Valley Arts. I think you'll be glad that you did. Number 11, the Gibson 2012 Les Paul Classic Custom. A couple people complained that I included the Tom Morgan finished Les Paul on the first video, and even though it was a limited guitar that most people probably have never seen, still some people seem to think that I just included a Les Paul. So I thought I'd include the Les Paul Classic Custom just to annoy those people a little bit more. However, this guitar actually is a fantastic instrument. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I've been known to be extremely critical of Gibson from about 2008 on to just here in the last couple of years. That said, the Les Paul Classic Custom was one that they absolutely got right. These were essentially Gibson Les Paul Customs that were made in the USA shop. The pickups they came with, I believe, were a 57 Classic Plus in the bridge and a 57 Classic in the neck. Great finish, great fretwork, straight necks, and they came in a couple of unique finishes. Of course, they came in the standard black with chrome hardware, or ebony as they call it. And there was also a natural colored one, and I believe there was a midnight blue or something along those lines. But they had the big custom headstock on them, and the best part about these guitars is they sold brand spanking new for $18.99. We moved through several of these at the store when they were new, and this is one model that I never saw a bad one of. And this is also one that I still cannot figure out for the life of me why Gibson quit making them, because it was a fantastic option, especially at that time. Number 12, the Gibson Corvus. Just kidding. That joke never gets old. Dumbasses. Number 12, the real number 12, the Gibson Flying V2. Bet you didn't know there was a V2, did you? This guitar was made from about 1979 to about 1982 and was kind of a scalloped V in shape. It also had these really, really unique V-shaped pickups in them that that I'm not familiar with in any other guitar out there. Vintage guitar enthusiasts, Gibson enthusiasts are probably going to recognize this guitar because this guitar likely is not news to them. However, if you're a little bit younger, if you're from the younger generation and you happen to like V-shaped guitars, this might be one that you're not familiar with. These were actually made really, really well, despite coming out of the 70s, which are known to be one of Gibson's darker eras. I've gotten to play a few of them over the last 10 years or so, and if I were still out playing live in a band, this is a guitar that I would consider owning, because it's just got this vibe about it that is just really, really cool, and it's one of the brighter spots in that particular era of Gibson history. you know, these are out there. They're not that tough to find. You can certainly find them. Prices range on the vintage market, you know, quite a bit, just depending on who's selling it and, you know, how much of their money they're trying to recuperate versus what it's actually worth. But if you do a little research, you can probably find one for pretty reasonable in the $2,000 to $2,500 range, which is what I would expect to pay for one. Cool guitar that a lot of people forget about and doesn't get talked about much. Go check out the Gibson Flying V2. Number 13, the Guild X88 Flying Star. A lot of people I know are familiar with the X79, which is another pointy guitar shape that Guild made back in the late 70s and early 80s. The X88, however, was a little bit more off the beaten path and not one that you hear talked about very much. Matter of fact, I could only find 4 of them listed for sale on Reverb prior to making this video. Mick Mars of Motley Crue actually was known for playing one of these guitars for a stretch, and I have only seen one in person that was another guitar that was severely underpriced. I had the opportunity to buy and I passed on it because financially the timing just was not right for me. That's another one I still wish I'd put a little bit more effort into. It's a really, really cool guitar. Pointy guitar enthusiasts will love this thing. Had a really, really fast playing neck. All the ones I've seen, I believe, are bolt-on necks. I don't think they made a set neck or a neck-through model. But these things just have 80 Shred Machine written all over it. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. There's also a little alert icon right next to the subscribe button. Hitting that will make sure that you get alerts for when new content is uploaded to this channel twice a week and that you don't miss out. I will list all of the guitars discussed in this video down in the description, as well as a link to the first video. Please make sure to leave me a comment down below and let me know what guitars you think would be a good addition to this list. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you in the next video.